Welcome to the Introverted Misfit podcast with me, Caroline Smith, where you'll discover how to become a socially confident version of yourself while embracing your inner misfit. Chances are that you've gone your whole life thinking you have to fake being someone you're not just to fit in. You've got to exude lively, extroverted sociability to have the social life you've always wanted. Well, not here you don't. On this podcast, we'll discuss the different ways you can connect and communicate like the introverted misfit that you are. Enjoy the show, Misfit! Hello to all of you who are tuning into this episode of the Introverted Misfit podcast. Can you relate to that feeling of being an introverted misfit? An introvert who finds socializing to be like a confusing maze that does nothing except make you really nervous and just want to go home. When you get into social situations, you start to freak out a little bit and you just keep thinking to yourself, I should have never come here. Most likely, at one point in your life, yes, you could have related to that statement because you are a listener of this podcast. And if that does sound like you, you're in luck because your experience and struggles are the entire inspiration behind starting my business, the Introverted Misfit, almost exactly 2 years ago. This is an exciting episode because February 4th, 2026 was the 2-year anniversary of the Introverted Misfit. It almost passed me by because I didn't realize it until a few days ago. So I changed gears for this week's podcast episode, which is why it's a little late, but it's fine. It's still going to be an episode that you can find some value in because even though it's my business's 2-year anniversary, the business is about you and helping people like you. So I'm going to include some value-packed tips and lessons that you can still take away from this episode. So first, I'm going to tell you the story behind my brand and my business, which is really the story of myself and probably the story of you or a story that you can relate to some extent. And then I want to tell you 4 major lessons that working and interacting with people like you has taught me during the last 2 years of me running this business and participating in my community. If you look up the definition of the word introvert, you'll find this: a person who is predominantly focused on internal thoughts and feelings rather than on external thoughts or social interaction, often characterized as being quiet or withdrawn. If you look up the definition of the word misfit, here's what you will find: a person whose behavior or attitude sets them apart from others in an uncomfortably conspicuous way. And if you don't know what conspicuous means, it means attracting notice or attention. So now we put those together and you have my business name, which also refers to myself and my person, the Introverted Misfit. The story of how I came to create this business really starts all the way back to my childhood, all of which I spent being an introverted misfit. From a very young age, around my first grade year of school, maybe a little after that, my parents and other family members began to notice some pretty visible differences in how I communicated and interacted with others versus how other kids my age were behaving. Now, I've always been quiet and more introverted, but based on the behaviors they were noticing, it was deeper than me just having a more reserved personality. It was things like having no concept of facial expressions, having a very monotone voice, having trouble meeting people, holding conversations, and being social in general, trouble picking up on social cues, struggling with things like emotional reciprocity, which is basically a give and take of emotional support and empathy, not knowing when it's appropriate for certain conversations to occur. All things related to socializing and communicating, which are both very necessary skills for people to have to a certain extent. And I say to a certain extent because even if the way you communicate and socialize looks a little different than the norm, you still have to have some way of doing it to survive. So it was very difficult for me to make friends all throughout my schooling years. And although I did pretty well academically, I struggled a lot socially. It's not that I didn't want to socialize with some of my peers and make some friends, but I just really struggled, and I didn't really have any idea why that was. But I did know pretty early on that I was a little different from most kids and teens because it felt like I was just kind of sitting on the sidelines and watching all of my peers play this really fun game that I couldn't play because I didn't know the rules. I didn't know their rules. I'll put it that way. And nobody would sit down and tell me the rules of this game. I guess you could call this game the game of human connection. So those struggles continue all the way up until high school, and they had been causing some pretty severe social anxiety at one point, even through my young adult years. In high school, my parents decided to have me psychologically evaluated to try and figure out what could be the cause of these social issues. And surprise, I get a diagnosis of what's then called Asperger's syndrome, but it's now known as autistic spectrum disorder level 1 or ASD level 1. ASD is a neurological disorder that affects my ability to communicate and interact with others in the way that most people do. So now that word misfit has a whole different meaning to it because I had been thinking of myself as a misfit. And then when I got the diagnosis, it was like my aha moment. So that's why I'm a misfit. At least now I had a reason as to why I struggled so much socially and relationship wise, and probably why I resonate so much with being an introvert who prefers to just be by myself because it's a lot easier than dealing with people. And by the way, I have met some autistic extroverts before, so there you go. We are not all the same. Now, how did I learn to cope with this reality? To make a long story short, I had to do quite a bit of internal and external work to overcome that social anxiety and to realize that I could become my own version of socially confident without being an extroverted social butterfly and without having 100% perfect social skills. So that's really the story behind me and my coaching business. I need to clarify here that you do not need to be autistic to resonate with the general idea of my story, because if you've made it this far, you identify with the term introverted misfit to some degree, whatever your unique situation is. So, yes, that's the story of me and my coaching business. Now, what exactly do I help people accomplish with my services? I help introverts who find socializing to be tricky and nerve-wracking overcome that without acting extroverted or being socially perfect. And like I tell people, I don't only work with people on the spectrum, lower support needs like myself. Although if you happen to be an autistic adult with lower support needs, I can certainly help you and would love to talk to you. But generally, the only requirements that you must meet to work with me are being an introvert, mostly, struggling with shyness or social anxiety, having social challenges or difficulties, and the most important is wanting to grow from the current state you're in. And grow does not mean change who you are. That's what I do, and that's who I help. Now I want to move on to the segment of this episode where I tell you some important lessons that the past 2 years of being in business has taught me about you. Not literally you, listener, but people like you, people who may struggle with some of the same social and self-confidence challenges that you face. Now, when I refer to the past 2 years of business, I'm mainly talking about the interactions that I've had with many people along the way, whether it's potential clients, actual clients, people who attend my monthly Misfit meetups, people I've met at conferences and other business travels who I get to talk to, and more. Here's the first lesson. You probably don't hate people. You just need the right social strategies and environment to find your people. So when I was still trying to find my footing in life, mostly regarding my mental health and my social issues and relationship challenges, I used to describe myself as hating people. I hate people. That's something I would often say and think to myself, and probably even I would say it to my parents every now and then, which now I promise you, I don't hate anyone. It was more of a exaggerated, I guess, hyperbole. You know how when you say I hate people, you just don't like dealing with them. Well, after I have my transformation into a more socially confident version of myself, I look around and notice that actually I don't hate people. I just needed the right support, the right social strategies, and the right environment in which I could practice those strategies without judgment and rejection. And I hear variations of this from the people I encounter. I don't like people. I just want to be alone. I don't want to deal with them. When in reality, I think those people probably just needed the right strategies. Perhaps you want to call them social skills, to help them become more comfortable in social settings so they know how to make the right connections. So if you've ever found yourself describing your situation and yourself as hating people, I want to encourage you to reframe that mindset to a more positive one. You don't hate people. You just need some social strategies that work for your needs and preferences. And once you figure out what those strategies are and you practice them enough, you'll start to make more connections, deep connections, superficial connections, friends, acquaintances, comrades, etc. So let's repeat it one more time. You don't hate people. You just need the right social strategies and environment to connect with your people, people who are a good fit for you. And then, of course, like the introverts that we are, once we've had enough of dealing with people, we go back into our hobbit hole and we recharge with some much needed alone time until we're ready to do it all over again. The second biggest lesson: community and support mean everything for a healthy, whole life. I don't care who you are, what your situation is, you are human, which means you need community and human connection of some degree. You wouldn't even be alive right now listening to this podcast if it were not for human connection, right? Your parents and your family or whoever had a hand in raising you. It doesn't matter if the connection is a short conversation with your neighbor a few times a week, or a conversation with someone who goes to the same church you do every Sunday, or going to those family gatherings that happen a few times a year. You need connection and support from other humans. We live in communities. We thrive when we have support from people who have our best interest in mind. When I host my monthly meetups for adults with social fears and difficulties, many people who attend regularly are always saying how much they appreciate the sense of community and belonging. Many times, people have gone most of their lives feeling like, well, a misfit, frankly. and they have trouble meeting people in general, but especially meeting people who understand their social struggles and aren't going to judge them for it. And the fact that they've been able to come to my meetups and find that sense of community with other like-minded people has almost given them a new kind of attitude, even outside of the meetups. And I only know this because I get your emails and DMs from those of you who come regularly and who really find value in this kind of thing. So even if the nature of that connection looks a little different from other people's way of communicating, it still serves a great purpose. And I see this up front when people who happen to be on the spectrum like myself of different support needs, they come to my meetups, and even though they're not as verbal as others, they still enjoy participating, and they communicate by pointing, and it gets the point across and it helps them connect with people. So whatever your way of connecting with others, let me repeat that. Whatever way your version of connection looks like, it is still valuable, and it serves a great purpose in your mental and emotional well-being. The third biggest lesson: shyness and social anxiety are relative to the people you're around. I'm not at all saying that shyness and social anxiety aren't real things, because they absolutely are. As a former social anxiety sufferer myself, I know firsthand how real of a disorder that is, even though it sounds ridiculous to other people who just can't even imagine being scared of people, but I get it. But what I'm saying is that in many cases, those social fears become almost irrelevant when people are around the right kind of people, meaning people who understand some of their fears and differences and who aren't going to laugh at them or reject them. It's crazy. It's almost as if when you put people in a safe environment where they don't feel like they have to be so hyper alert about what people say and think about them, they aren't so shy anymore. Now, of course, your shyness or anxiety around socializing is still going to be there once you leave that safe space and return back to the quote unquote real world, for lack of a better term, unless you actively do something to overcome it. Which, by the way, if you are still trying to overcome it on your own, you and I should definitely talk on a free connection call, which you can book, finding the link in my description. But I think a really good starting point when you're trying to overcome this nervousness is to find a group of people who you can trust are going to accept you and interact with you without judging. That is going to be a really big step to get you started on your social confidence journey. And lastly, the fourth biggest lesson that 2 years of business has taught me: social confidence is not about being socially perfect. It's about doing what you can do and being okay with what you can't do. If you've ever heard me say the tagline of my business, you know the foundation of what I do is help introverts become socially confident without being extroverted or socially perfect. And that's because I myself did that exact same thing. I became confident without feeling the need to obsess over every social mistake that I make, and without the pressure of trying to be perfect every time. I can confidently tell you that I am not socially perfect, even as socially confident as I am. And that's the same thing that I want for all of my clients and the people that I encounter on a daily basis, and everyone who my work may touch. I want people to know that social perfection is a myth. And I know that may not sound like some groundbreaking thing to say coming from someone on the spectrum like myself, because you're like, of course, of course you think social perfection is a myth. But I think it's true for people who aren't on the spectrum too. Maybe to a lesser degree, but it's still true. People are always going to say something that doesn't come out quite right every now and then, and you'll have to not get all in your head about it and just find a way to explain what you actually meant when you said that. You're always going to say or do something a little awkward. But guess what? Nobody is thinking about those little moments as much as you're obsessing and overthinking about them. So you can learn to let those moments go and just move on with your life. Based on the work that I've done on both myself and with others down through the years, here's my personal definition of social confidence. Because I always say I help people become socially confident, but what does that mean? Here's what it means. The ability to navigate social settings while feeling self-assured that you belong just as much as anyone else, and without feeling the need to be perfect. This means you can converse, engage, and express yourself without the excessive fear of judgment or rejection. So that is what everyday people like you have taught me over the past 2 years of being in business. And like I said, if you want to become a socially confident version of yourself too, whatever the source of your social fears and difficulties are, that's exactly what I help people like you do in my work. Just to reiterate it one more time, I help introverts who find socializing to be difficult and nerve-wracking overcome that without acting extroverted or being socially perfect. If that service sounds like something you need and you want to know if you and I could work well together, I would love to talk more about your unique situation on a free connection call. We can talk about how my services, including my one-on-one program, Communicate with Quiet, Quirky Confidence, can help you become a more socially confident version of yourself. And that is it for this celebratory podcast episode. Happy anniversary to me and the Introverted Misfit. And I am hoping that there will be many, many more years to come of fostering social confidence with the people who I am blessed to interact with and work with. As always, if you enjoyed this talk, please don't forget to hit the follow or subscribe button. Leave a review and or a comment, whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Spotify podcasts, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts from, and share this podcast with a friend. Thanks for listening and have a great day. Hey, Misfit. If you enjoyed today's show, there's more where that came from. I want to invite you to join the Introverted Misfit newsletter so that you'll never miss an episode. In addition to being notified about new podcast episodes every week, you'll receive more value-packed content from me that will nurture your inner misfit and help you find and manage your very own introvert-friendly community. You can find the link in the description, the show notes, or you can go directly to theintrovertedmisfit.com/newsletter. I'll see you there.